a few words about mapping and conversion, because we know that we have several formats for invoicing, and translation between these formats are often proposed as simple ways of building capability for more than one format. So it's proposed as a solution when different standards are being used. So that is conversion or translation. It's often more complex than expected. The picture below here is representing a view of the European standard and the two syntaxes, UBL and cross-industry invoice, where each element has a specific location. So a business term defined in the semantic data model has a specific location in the syntax. These kind of graphical expressions make it seem quite simple and straightforward. But looking at different invoicing standards and how they connect, it's not always as simple as this. I'll just give you what you now see on screen is an actual mapping between two invoice formats, and even in this case, it's a mapping between a UBL1 invoice and a UBL2 invoice. So, okay, it's gone 10 years between the definitions of the semantics in this case, but still the complexity is greater than what you first think, perhaps. And it has consequences on archiving and traceability. So the receiving application if it's a receiving application, that I said the buyer receives an invoice, translates it into another format, he must ensure that all the information is actually transformed into the new format in a correct way. And also, it has to consider, what should I do with the original received XML document? Can I discard of it because I have made a transformation, or do I need to keep it for legal reasons or for other reasons? So this is an area which is much more complex than what it seems. That's my experience, at least. So typically, the transformation takes. For this depiction we have now on screen is a simple view of the four-corner model, or where we have applications that connect through access points. Where we have to the left, the corner one is creating an invoice, and its access point, it's sending it to the receiver's access point, who connects to the receiver's ERP system. And typically, the transformation is taking place after the ERP system has created the invoice and before it's being sent. And so, for example, I have an old-fashioned legacy accounting system where I create my invoice. That is not according to European standard. So either my application, like an integration software, or a service provider, transforms my in-house file into a standard exchange format, like UBL or cross-industry invoice. So either I do it, but it could also be that the receiver only can receive and process its in-house format, so it doesn't really natively understand cross-industry invoice or UBL. Then on the receiving side, you need to transform it into to the format which your ERP system understands. And this is essentially happening in most cases. Few systems have native support for UBL or cross-industry invoice as today. Perhaps it will be different in the future, but as it is now, transformation is very, very common. And things that may happen while transforming, I made this kind of overview, situations to consider. This can be as a basis for discussion in more detail, but typically you can have a case where all the information is being transferred from the exchange format to your in-house format. It could be that it's to an almost identical structure, such as I receive a UBL 2.0 invoice, but I've implemented 2.1, so it's more of a technical thing to switch over to this other version. But it could also be that the structure is different and the content must be adjusted from what I received and to what I import into my system. And so these are two scenarios. If the information must be adjusted, it could be that it's done irreversibly. So, for example, if we have in the standard, we have subtotals, for example, but in my internal system, I only have totals, so the subtotals have to be summed together, and from that I cannot deduct or come back to the subtotals. So it's an irreversible change. Also, if I have structured information being received and I concatenate it into an unstructured format, such as a long string, that's also irreversible. You wouldn't know how to split it up again to the original structure. But it could be reversible. So if I receive according to one format, which has like a numeric country code, it can be translated into an alpha representation, and you can do that back and forth how many times you want. You always will get the same result. Also, more on a shady way, that like VAT rate in percent in one format, but you have it in just the amount in another, and you can deduct it by calculating the original rate. So that's not a good example, perhaps, but it's still kind of expressing my point, I think. It could be also that information is deleted, either on purpose. That's one format doesn't have, my in-house format doesn't have all the elements that is being exchanged. And I've decided that things like perhaps the supplier web address is not essential to me, so I just delete it. But it could also be by accident. And if you noticed my mapping that I showed on screen, it's tend to be very complex, and some cases might be that I haven't done a proper mapping, or the sender is sending more information than what I expect. So the European norm, it has, I don't know, 250, 300 elements in it, somewhere around that. If I, as a seller, would add XML elements that are not specific, essentially if I extend and add things that are not defined in the standard, of course the receiver wouldn't be able to transform that into its in-house format if it doesn't know beforehand that the information will be there. So this overpopulation of the XML files can easily be neglected. And finally, we have actually cases where information is added. So it could be that we have a file that only contains the item numbers, like the GS1 GTINs, and the receiving application is adding the name of the items based on something picked up from a database, for example, and add that to the in-house format. So these are examples of situations to consider, and I think it's important, particularly if you are for yourself or for the sake of a customer, for example, are going to provide transformation. Really consider these issues. Would any of these situations come up, and document the consequences of that, so that you are aware what happens. It doesn't come as a surprise when everything goes into production. So with that, I actually leave it for questions and answer if you have any so far. So I open up the floor.